All right, we got a great podcast coming up here. The great Chris Milholen from Nets Daily joining us to talk Ben Simmons, talk Kevin Durant, talk play-in game, talk what the season's been like covering it up until this point, what to expect for the last little run here into the play-in, and then hopefully the playoffs. We're going to get into it all, but first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Thanks for making us your first listen, free and available on all of those podcasting platforms, YouTube as well. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Check out PrizePicks.com. Use the promo code NBA or go to your app store and download the app today. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. And we are here with the great Chris Milholen from Nets Daily to talk about this season, what it's been like this year, all the ups, downs, in-betweens, the roller coaster ride that has been the Nets season. Chris, how's it going, man?
Doing good, brother. How about you?
Yeah, pretty good. 4 games left to go in the season. Feels like there's like infinite things to talk about, and also like at the same time sort of like playing the string out on just an absolutely wild season. You cover the Nets for Nets Daily, do an awesome job over there, obviously post games and everything else. What's it been like for you covering this team this year? I mean, I feel like September, I think we talked back in September, or it was like September or August, sometime around there. And I feel like that was like an absolute lifetime ago. What's it been like covering the Nets team this year?
Yeah, I think at the same time I told you that the last time I was on here too. It's like we knew what we were getting into when you were covering this team, right? And especially that was obviously there's a whole different team back then because you had the Harden, you obviously didn't have Seth, Andre, and Ben at that point. It's kind of really come full circle with this team. You know what I mean? Like, because like the whole year, it's like you knew that there had to be so many things that would have to go in the Nets' favor in order for them to reach that first elusive championship, right? And that included multiple dominoes stemming with health, right? So then obviously you had then the Irving situation. I think I came on. Yeah, I was on when he was away from the team at that point. But obviously he came on a little later in the year. That's a whole different thing. So obviously leading up, are the Nets going to kind of cave into that? Are they going to make him a full part-time player, just make him do real games? Obviously they did that until the mandate flipped. And then, the athletes got the exemption. And then obviously you had Kevin Durant get injured in that midst a little beforehand, before he started coming back as a full-time player. And then now today you got 4 games remaining. They're the 10th seed. They're already locked into a play-in spot. And at the end of the day, it's one of those things. It's, is Ben Simmons going to come back? Is he not coming back? Personally, what I'm thinking, and obviously we're going to get into it, I'll talk a little bit more in depth about it later on. I personally think that if the Nets do make a deep playoff run, he comes back, but I can't see him quite coming back within, obviously, from now to the play-in tournament is definitely no. But even in the first round in a 7-game series, it depends how long that one goes. So there's a lot of factors that weigh up and down in that type of situation. But overall, dude, it's been a blast. It's been quite the blast.
Well, there's never a shortage of things to talk about for sure. I mean, I guess when it comes to sports and covering a team every day, that's really kind of the most you can ask for. It's like, hey, it's been interesting the whole time. That's for sure. And so we're in a situation where as we go forward to the rest of the year, as we kind of like, ramp up to the playoffs, it feels like the storylines are going to continue to kind of just probably present themselves. Let's talk Ben Simmons here for a second. Mm-hmm. So there have been an unbelievable amount of conflicting reports regarding Ben Simmons. Like you have Shams coming on and saying one thing, and we kind of have an idea where he gets his info from, and then Woj kind of gives almost like a completely different version of what the Simmons situation is like. Where do you see the Ben Simmons situation right now? Like you kind of alluded to there a second ago, like, and maybe you just made a definitive statement saying like that it was just kind of done. Is that where you feel with his, like right now, like in terms of regular season play, and like 0% chance we see him at all?
I think what the Nets are doing is they just don't want to rule him out, right? It's that point because they don't know how far this team can go, right? Because if they do rule him out for the year, the remainder of the year, and it turns into kind of like maybe a Zion thing where, hey, he was ruled out a while ago, but he has a chance of coming back now. It's not quite the most like organic look, I guess you could say, right? Because it could throw some of the teammates off. Obviously, his teammates may know behind the scenes if that happens. but I think they're mostly just keeping their optimism open. It's one of those things because, throughout this whole entire thing, it's been very confusing, right? Because then you have the setback, and then it took weeks for us to find out that he had a herniated disc in his back. And right then and there, anyone that's had a herniated disc, I haven't, but anyone that has knows that that's not a day-to-day thing or a week-to-week thing. It's a long-term thing. It's something that you got to be very cautious with, especially with a player that makes his living in transition offense. He plays very fast. That's like kind of his pace on top of playing defense, right? So, with Simmons, I think right now it is the light shooting. I imagine that they're taking it very, very slow, because at the end of the day, like, even though that, hey, there's if I had to choose between one end of the spectrum and the other, it would probably be more so that he doesn't end up playing this year. But I feel like they're just doing a lot of light shooting. They're kind of just getting the ropes underneath him. They're at practice. Tomorrow we'll find out. But at the same time, you see throughout every pregame now, he's doing the smaller things, kind of passing to his teammates, helping them warm up on the floor. But, it's a lot of conflicting reports. Obviously, you don't know one side or another. It's evident that they're both getting their words from different sources at that point. So, it's kind of a waiting game, waiting to see. But, in my opinion, I really do think that it's get past the first round. And like Woj said in his report, even if they get into the first round, then there could be any real discussion, which doesn't add any real clarity of whether he's going to play or not,
As someone that covers the team like on a daily basis and, talks to players and coaches and all this stuff, do you feel like the Nets I'll phrase it this way. A general complaint around the Nets has been that they do not seem to always be so forthcoming with injury news. Like, they need not be. Like, you're not obligated to like always just give exact stuff, right? Like, there's no rule that you have to give injury reports, but there's no rule that says like they have to be super, super accurate down to the day of when players are going to return. Okay, so that being said, do you feel like, is there a frustration around covering the team when it's like, it almost feels like we're at the point where just give no reports, because nothing that ever comes out seems to ever be accurate anyway. And so, like, do you get that sense from covering the team, or is that like something that maybe is just overstated in the world of Netsdom, that like the injury stuff, even compared to the rest of the NBA, seems a little wonky with like getting accurate representations of what's happening with the players?
Most definitely, right? Because if you look at other teams, like I guess a lot of teams that come to my mind right away that are very transparent with the injury reports, like the Pacers, the Rockets, the Kings, the Lakers. Because like obviously with all the PR accounts, you see how they manage it and how the Nets manage it, right? And because the Nets, like for years now, it's been, I guess, throughout the whole Marks type of tenure, right, that they haven't been very transparent on giving timelines. They're not transparent on kind of like what we're dealing right now. Because look at the whole season. Look at Joe Harris. They weren't transparent on that until they had to really shut him down and say, hey, he's getting the second surgery. It's already scheduled. You know what I mean? So you could wait. You could kind of look at it in two aspects. You could either look at it as they don't want it to become a distraction outside that locker room and rather keep it in. Or at the same time, you could also look at it as they're just want to remain as optimistic as possible, considering how much stuff, like I mentioned before, how much stuff has to go in their favor. So I kind of view it as more of the distraction point more than anything. I really do think that they kind of keep a lot of their stuff to the chest, just in order for it to not spread around and become maybe a narrative or some form of kind of just overall just distraction. You know what I mean? Because especially with the Simmons thing, any detail that gets leaked about Simmons or any detail that comes out about Simmons, it's smashed on national television right then and there. You know what I mean? So especially when you have a team that's sitting in the 10th seed, and obviously, if you look at how the number of games are going down, it doesn't look like it's likely that they're going to crack the 7 or 8 unless they really win all these 4 games. Technically they have an easy schedule, but when you add that Simmons factor in there and being transparent, that's another thing. I get it's completely frustrating on the Nets part. It's frustrating on the media part as well, because they're not really transparent on that. They had a lot of details. They really mostly just come clean when they have to come clean. You know what I mean? Like when the time hits 0. That's really what this team does.
And that, I think, is probably part of the frustration, right? It's like, and maybe there has been some, some things that are outside the norm, right? Like, I don't think they're purposely like obfuscating like around the truth. It's not that. And I think they maybe have had some sort of bad luck in here around just some of the injuries. And so but it all builds to like this weird narrative where it just does feel like on a game-to-game basis or like a press conference to press conference basis, especially with Nash, it's like, hey, you just can't, you just don't until they step on the court. Like there's kind of no point in giving updates
because that's it. Yeah. Like you hit it right there on the nail. Cause like you look at just how Joe's transpired, Joe's like you thought Simmons was like the poster boy type of, obviously he's a star, he's going to get more national attention than what Harris went through. But like, just get off on a little tangent with Harris. With Harris, it was one of those things where, okay, he's you hear Nash, he's like, okay, he's weeks away, right? The weeks away. This was like kind of like, I guess you'd say in January-ish. This is like entering January. So he had the surgery in November. And then right then and there, then it goes quiet, it goes quiet for like 2 weeks. No one asked for an update because you thought weeks away, we'll just see the name pop up as questionable, probable, doubtful on the injury report, go from that, right? And then you hear that he's got a setback. They won't describe the setback. And then they kind of say flare up on top of that. So flare up and setbacks, that's like their two favorite words when it comes to type of any injury problem that has like in their rehabilitation, right? So, and then obviously at that time, we kept asking, they're like, we have no update. He's trying to battle through. He's trying to fight through it, which means like, okay, he's probably trying his best to either manage the pain or deal with the pain and try to get back on the floor. And then, right then and there, when they had to come clean about the injury report, about him getting a second surgery, that's what they had to get done. And especially, what's it called? One other key detail a lot of people I know were especially commenting on when I posted the medical update was that it was a whole different kind of surgery group that did it, because they were in Wisconsin, they were in Milwaukee, I believe, compared to the HSS in Brooklyn. So that's another aspect you could just kind of throw in there, but I would take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah, they moved them out of state, and like, just the whole thing's just weird. I do have one more Ben Simmons question for you. We'll get to that. We're going to talk a little bit about Kevin Durant. We'll do some predictions for the end of the season. The kind of start to wrap things up here. First, got to talk to you about our friends over at PrizePicks. Look, if you're into the NBA, I know you are, you're listening to the podcast, you love the player prop stuff. And PrizePicks is the absolute best player prop operator out there, hands down. You can't go to one of these other big sites. PrizePicks has everything for you. It's super easy to find the players that you want to pick, and all the stats too: rebounds, assists, points. Oh my gosh, I should have just started with points. Points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks. They have everything on there on PrizePicks. It's super easy. You just pick 2 to 5 players. You do the over-under on their projections. You can win up to 10 times on any entry. And it's just you versus those projected numbers. Not like some of these other daily fantasy sites where you're putting up lineups against all these sharks out there. Not to worry. Over on PrizePicks, super easy. You versus the numbers, and you're good to go. You can also combine it across sports as well. So if you want to, baseball season coming up, you pile some basketball and some baseball together, PrizePicks has you covered. PrizePicks has an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all of our users. Get $50 for free. That's easy. If a player on your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point, but you have to use the promo code NBA. That's right. Exclusive offer, just available for Locked On fans. Sign up today. Use the code NBA for $50 for free. If a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point, PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. And when you're done with PrizePicks, head on over to betonline.net, your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. You find the scores, the developments. This week's the Masters got going up there with the odds over on BetOnline. They have podcasts, reviews, every single thing you need to get in basically every sport that you want to ever imagine for your betting needs. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. Head on over to betonline.net so you can learn about all the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, one more question about Ben Simmons, then we can move off this one. But do you think that in light of the trade, right? So the trade with Harden goes down. Obviously, it's the biggest trade, one of the biggest trades in NBA history, frankly. Do you think that, like, I'm going to assume that the back thing and the herniated disc is a new thing, but is there like a problem? Is there possibly a problem around diligence here? Because obviously, like, the idea when you trade for Ben Simmons is that Ben Simmons is going to play. You don't trade James Harden away for a guy that's just not going to play. Like James Harden, for all the problems that he had, especially near the end, like, if you trade him for Ben Simmons and Ben Simmons doesn't play, I won't even put words in your mouth. It's a full-blown disaster. Like, and even factoring in that getting Curry and Drummond have been like key parts, but that was it's
your main piece. It's your main piece.
Right. Like, do you think there's a diligence problem here, or is it just like maybe a little bit of bad luck again? Like, because there's no world where they didn't think he was going to play, but now we're looking at the situation where he just might not. So I don't know if to speak to a greater problem, or is it just kind of bad luck maybe.
I'm personally I'm in the middle. That's how kind of where I stand, because Nash has disclosed that we knew about any type of problem that we did, there wasn't anything wrong. That's kind of where he stood when the trade happened, right? And when Simmons came into Brooklyn, then he started ramping up. That's when he says, "Oh, the back injury happened." That's when the setback happened in the rehab. That's when he hurt his back, right? But that anyone that knows anything with backs or knows anything, just I guess not even just common sense, but that getting a herniated disc like that, it's a little, you could, it's a little suspicious. You know what I mean? Right. So I could see it as being a diligence problem 100%, because you could look at it this way too. Harden really wanted out. He really pushed that trade. And obviously with Morey, I think it was Ramona Shelberg's report when she kind of opened up on the dialogue between Marks and Morey. You see how bad Morey really pushed Marks to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when that happened, and obviously the trade's not official till all the players pass their physicals, get all that stuff done. And then that's why it took a little while for Harden to get on the court, or Seth Curry and Andre Drummond to get on the court, because James Harden couldn't finish the physical in time. It seems with other key pieces in the report, right? So I could see it as a diligence thing. I wouldn't really put my thumb on that and say, hey, that's the main thing here. I think more so the Nets were kind of looking more towards, at that point, I think they were more looking towards the future more than anything, because Ben Simmons is locked up for almost identical to what Kevin Durant's locked up to. I think he's a year before Kevin's out of contract, right? And at that point, you also got to think in your back of your mind, it's when you trade a guy like James Harden out of the team, it could serve as a huge distraction. You really don't know how much damage at that time that's going to do, even though his play was decreasing game by game. You know what I mean? So that's another aspect you could add to it.
Yeah, Simmons has 1 year. Durant goes one more season beyond Simmons. Simmons is this one plus the next 3, and then Durant's this one plus the next 4, and then obviously Kyrie has the player option coming up this summer. Okay, so let's move into Durant here. So we are on when you have Kevin Durant on your team, you have to be on a championship arc. It has to be part of your timeline, because he's one of that small class of players that's just among the discussion of best in the game. I don't think that's really in question at all. He's not going to be in the MVP discussion this season, but that's more just because he missed too much time, and you've had some of these other guys that have been amazing. Do you think that where they stand with Durant right now, would this be, because this would be year 3, right? Yeah. This would be he didn't play the first year. Obviously, we knew that was part of the deal with the Achilles. He was not going to play. And then last year, we all know that they come within an inch basically of moving to the conference finals, and he plays out of his mind, but other stuff kind of gets in the way. And now this year, for where they are now, they are. It's hard to see them as a championship arc team, but I'm happy to have that change. Do you feel with Durant that these are wasted years, or is this just part of the basketball cycle? Because there's no doubt that he's one of the very, very best, right? But we are now on this 3rd season of no championships, and you have this player. Where do you see the Nets and the Durant timeline as being successful, not successful? It just is what it is. How do you kind of see the situation with Durant?
It's interesting. Well, first off, they wasted his career high the other night. They completely wasted that. But I'm gonna kind of relay the same type of dialogue that Durant told us at the practice, right? Because Durant, what he mostly said was, we're trying to build something long term, not just this year, right? And that makes sense, because if you looked at the Nets, right, and you look at their home record, you look at how the crowd kind of engages in the contest, especially the only times the crowd really gets alive. Obviously, the opponents weighs a lot. The opponents really weigh a lot for the crowd to get into it, because when you have the crowd into it, that's the whole embody of culture. You know what I mean? What's the atmosphere like? What's the fan perspective like? So you have all that in there. So I think with Durant, they're definitely, it's one of those things the Nets have to know in their back of their mind that their title window is closing. I even with Irving, if he signs the long-term extension, right, and obviously it's inevitable at this point it's going to happen. You know what I mean? So I think with Durant, you don't know how. It's scary to even think this way, because how good he is right now. But with a player that's kind of I wouldn't call him injury prone, but he has one injury a year where he's missing at least 10 to 15 games. You know what I mean? And at that point, he's kind of getting out of the poster boy block years of 29 to 33. That's your stereotypical prime years in basketball. So he's exiting that. So you don't know how good or how high at an effective level he could be in 2 years, in 3 years, or in his tail end years of his contract, right? So right now, it's one of those things where it's obviously a lot of stuff hasn't gone in the Nets' favor stemming with health, from stars to role players all around. And obviously, you could put your due diligence blame on Nash because, or at least what Sean Marks brought in. Once Steve Nash got hired, I think I even told you, I was blown away by it because it was more so I knew right there. I was like, okay, we obviously know Kevin Durant and Steve Nash. They work together in Golden State. Yeah, that connection there. He's someone that I guess he's well respected in the locker room, and he's manages personalities, but he doesn't have that coaching experience.
Yeah,
they should have brought in someone like Mike D'Antoni and made Steve Nash his assistant, because then you have someone that actually knows or has been there, done that on the coaching side of things, and especially too. Star players don't end up being great coaches. It's always the role players that become the good coaches because they see everything and know everything about the game, perspective wise. But, stepping back to the Durant question, it's one of those things that they are wasting they are wasting years, in my opinion. They really are. And, like I said before, you don't know how this guy's going to play in the tail end years of his contract, especially when he's, like I said before, he's missing 10 games out of each year, even more than that. And he's exiting his prime years. So, at this point, they know their title window's closing. I've always been the guy that always said, hey, it's got to be this year, and if anything, if you want to stretch it anymore, it's got to be next year. If it's not one of these 2 years, you got to really weigh it out, and you don't know what could happen at that point when it comes to maybe trade requests. And
it's hard to think that way, but you have to. Like you only get so many bites of the apple with superstars like this. Like it doesn't last forever. I think Hill's age curve will look a little better than some other guys because he just has that skill set that probably has like a steadier, like a not so precipitous decline. But I'm glad you brought up Nash because actually was going to be my next question around him. Is that because one of the Nets folks' favorite thing to do is when things are going wrong is to blame Nash, right? I think sometimes it's warranted. Sometimes it's just like the fail-safe thing that people do because they don't know what else to kind of complain about.
Scapegoat. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And like it's super easy to blame the coach. I think that there are times where he has not done stuff to help himself here, but I also feel like maybe it could be overblown. Like, where do you stand with that? And you gave a little bit of the answer here a minute ago, and I think that's a pretty honest take on it, saying that like maybe I'm not gonna put words in your mouth, but there was probably some parts of the job that he was not maybe perfectly suited for. Where do you is it like fair to really kind of blame Nash for some of the moves that have happened this year? Like, should they, even with all the weirdness, should they just have more wins under their belt? Like at this point, just based on like sort of who they have, like, is there like a missed opportunity that is like maybe might have actually fallen in Nash's lap a little bit here?
Well, I'll start off with this, right? I can't, at least, Doug, maybe you can help me out on this. I can't name one NBA coach that could have probably dealt with what Steve Nash was thrown at this whole entire year. Agreed. Kind of with injuries, the Kyrie Irving saga, then you got the superstar trade, now you got Ben Simmons. And he keeps such like a cool demeanor. Yes. And not having that really slam into the locker room and cause a huge distraction.
Just to interrupt there for 1 second, like the other piece of that too is like that probably gets undervalued, right? Because it's like it's been such a disaster, and the fact that there's really never seemed to be any turmoil on the team except for Harden, which I don't think that was probably could be helped at that point. So like I don't think anyone solves that really. So I think that, so you can go on, but I just wanted to like just really hammer that home. It's like that. I totally agree with you. That piece is as difficult a job or a lift from like a public facing standpoint than, and no coach was put in anywhere close to the situation that Nash was this year.
Not even close. And like
maybe Vogel, maybe Frank Vogel.
Maybe Vogel. Vogel's up there. Vogel's definitely up there. You know what I mean? Like, cause that's the thing. It's like he's dealt with so much, but I on the coaching side where, hey, he makes the bread and butter on the coaching side, right? With the coaching side, he's a very old school. He's got a lot of old school in him. He rides with veterans down the stretch. He doesn't make that much adjustments. He does. Obviously, his timeouts have gotten a lot better, but at the same time, you could tell everyone knows this. From last year to this year, it's evident to even see the loss of Mike D'Antoni. You know what I mean? And the way the offense runs, timeouts, the ways he kind of structures the game, substitutions. You could really tell how big D'Antoni's influence was on Nash, right? Because with Nash in the beginning, the whole reason he was really brought in, and Mark said it himself, and kind of even Steve said it himself, they all both hinted at it, was to really just manage the personalities and have that well-respected body and leader in the locker room. And obviously Kevin Durant, like I talked about earlier, he has history with him, so there's That's another key aspect. You keep your superstar player happy, you're going to go good ways. But at the same time, it's one of those things. They're a championship contending team. They have a lot of potential. And as each year goes on, the Eastern Conference is progressively getting better. You don't even know what's going to happen next year. There's rumors LeBron even coming back to the Cavaliers. You add LeBron and the Cavs and add even more, and you have Nash in there. I think that's a little too hard. I would personally, like I mentioned before, I would have liked to see the Nets go with a veteran type of coach, someone who's been there, done that. I wouldn't give names at all, like pick out who or over Nash or whatever the case is, but they got to bring in someone that had a little more coaching experience. Because like I mentioned before, D'Antoni and having Steve Nash as an assistant is probably the best way to go about it. But at the same time, like I mentioned before, you can't praise Steve Nash enough for what he's dealt with this year, how he's absorbed it, how he's really just absolutely kept it out of the locker room. There's no distractions at all. The players don't get asked about even that much, so that's where you really got to praise him there, overall. But like I said before, it's the 3 year, it's at that coaching window where, okay, he's going to be entering that third year. That's usually when decisions have to be made of, okay, whether he's going to go on for the foreseeable future. Is he going to take a back seat on the bench and kind of have someone come in, or is he just going to kind of go in a separate direction, part ways? You know what I mean? It's going to be that on the way too.
Yeah, it's one of these things. It's like hard to imagine them going a different direction, but it's also like you can definitely find some warts here. Like, in terms of like you said, definitely with the in-game stuff, it does leave a lot to be desired. Like, there's been enough curious decisions specifically in game that like and we don't need to litigate all of them here, but like there's been enough. And I've been and I've kind of stood by Nash a lot, saying that sometimes those things do get a little overrated. But we are at a point of the season where like having maybe a few adjustments with another W or two actually probably would matter at this point. All right, I got a couple more questions for Chris here, including some predictions that are going to come down the pike. First, got to talk to you about our friends over at Rock Auto. Look, you're in the car right now. You're listening to the podcast. Maybe you hear something's going wrong with the car. You need it to fix. You need to get the fix. You're a do-it-yourselfer. You have to use Rock Auto. Please do not go to those local chains. They disappear into the back. They come back with an unmarked box. You don't know if it's the right thing you need. You don't know what's going to cost. It feels like they're just kind of making it up as they go along. Not on Rock Auto. You're going to spend 30 or even 50% less on those car parts. Super easy. They just have drop-down menus by make and model, so you'll find your car or truck there pretty easily, and they have everything you need: motor oil, tail lamps, brake parts, even new carpet if your kids keep spilling stuff like mine do all over the carpets. Rock Auto has everything you need. You go to rockauto.com right now to see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in the How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. RockAuto.com. All right. Just while we were recording this, by the way, it does look like they officially reported that Ben Simmons is out through at least the playing games. So that came in as Chris and I were recording here. So that it pretty much holds up to what you were saying, but just want to point out that if this comes out like 24 hours later, you listen, you already know that happened while we were recording. Okay. 4 games left to go in the season. Currently in the 10th seed. Do not own the tiebreaker against Charlotte. Do own a tiebreaker against Atlanta. If they get there, play Cleveland one more time. How do you see these next 4 games playing out for the Nets? How do you, and then you can go right from that 4 game. Because they're a lot, it's 100% they're going to be at least in the play-in. And they're not going to, and they can't get out of the play-in at this point. So where do you see these next 4 games going? And then how do you see and how do you turn that into what happens here in the play-in game? Because I feel like Nets fans, I almost want to start being in manage expectations mode here on the podcast. And I feel like we've been doing that a lot this season, just being like, hey, you got to pump the brakes here. The season's kind of going a little off the rails. How do you see these next 4 games in the play-in? And is there good reason to hope that the season gets prolonged, that they actually get into the playoffs?
Well, I'll start with this, right? So you got the 4 games remaining. Obviously, you look at Cleveland. That's the kind of their last. Well, the last game against the championship contender was Milwaukee on the season. That was their only way to really make a statement here. Cleveland, you can make a minimal statement by defeating them and kind of showing everyone, hey, we're not finished. We're not mostly we're not finished here. You got New York in the Garden. That's also a nice little way to make kind of an in-city statement regardless. Obviously New York City talks. A lot of Knicks fans are loving that the Nets are falling and collapsing right there. That's another way to kind of rejuvenate the kind of the mojo around the team to win that game. And then you got others. You got the Pacers at the end of the year. That's kind of interesting as well, with the Pacers, because it's at that point, they're not going to be playing really for anything. But, we saw how Detroit played against the Nets. It's one of those things. But, I kind of just sum it all up instead of going down the list of opponents, right? They're locked in the play-in tournament no matter what. The best bet for this Nets team, and realistically speaking, the only way I really kind of see this team getting out of the play-in tournament with ease is that they make it in the 7 or 8 seed and they win that game.
Yeah.
Because don't get me wrong, if they're in the 7-8 and they lose, then they have to play the winner of the 9-10. But if you're in the 9-10 slot and you win that game, then you have to go against the loser of the 7-8 and then now get you into the playoffs, right? And everyone's always talking about saying, okay, they got to play it smart. They got to play the cards smart. Okay, they could lose this game and go up so they could match up against Miami instead of Philadelphia. Just X, Y, and Z over there. It's one of those things that it's so tough. If they're in the 9-10 spot, I could really see them kind of not getting out of the play-in tournament. That's how kind of I see it, because at that point, you're in the 9-10, you win the game, then you go against the loser of 7-8. And then I feel like that's the game that they would lose. I don't think they would lose the 9-10 game, but I could see them losing the 7-8 game to get into the playoffs, the winner to go home. So you have that. But that's kind of where I stand. Overall, though, I'm very optimistic. I really do think there'll be a first-round series with this year. And then depending if it's Miami or Philadelphia is going to be interesting because you don't know, obviously, you know where the mismatches are with Philly. You know what they could bring. And kind of the tension, the rivalry that's in there, so that could fuel the Nets alone to get past. And then you got Miami, who obviously they made a very big statement with last time they played. But, it's really one of those things that you got to kind of just wait it out, see what teams come up next. But if they're in the 9-10 slot, I would have to weigh heavy towards they're not going to get out of playing.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like, it's just, I think that there's a certain thing that folks think it's like, and I get it because it's like the Nets and they have Durant and like, there's a sort of like foregone conclusion. It's almost like they deserve to make the playoffs. And I think in some ways they do, but like, it's just, there's just been nothing that's happened this season that's can give you like a lot of, I guess there's very little that's happened this season that could give you a lot of promise, I think. Like, or
consistency. I think it's,
exactly.
Sorry to cut you off. I think it's like the consistency too, right? Because like with Irving, now he's having a shooting slump. Patty Mills' extended shooting slump is, it's not going to get fixed. It feels like it's just not going to get fixed. It's been dragging on for so long. A lot of people even think that stemmed from the 3-point contest. That's how long it's really been, right? And then you look at other kind of just down the rest of the roster with kind of the injuries. Yeah, obviously Gordon and Bruce. Goran Dragic, I heard, is still in Atlanta. That's what I heard from someone. So maybe I think he's still down there as long as he's still feeling symptoms. Bruce Brown, he has the flu. He's kind of like 50-50 if he's going to play. It's one of those.
It looks like he's going to play. It looks like he's going to play on Tuesday. Yeah,
it looks like he's going to play. So you have that kind of as a kind of a big Swiss Army knife type of player in there as well. But, it's one of those things, like I said before, if they're not healthy, if they don't have, even if they miss one of their role guys, a guy even as valuable as like Bruce Brown or Goran Dragic, Seth Curry, Drummond, just taking out one of those from the equation, it leaves you like a lot of people just don't know their roles. They don't know how to kind of take on an increased role or take on a decreased role. You know what I mean? Especially we see it all the time with Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving. When Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving get going early as a duo, very early in the game, a lot of the players take a back seat on the offensive end and just let them do their ISO ball, let them do their 2-man games. And that's where you don't have Seth Curry getting hot. That's where you don't have other shooters getting hot. Well, Patty Mills not getting hot, but just all around. So, that I just wanted to throw that in there. Sorry to cut you off there.
No, yeah. And it's actually, that's a great example. Well, it's not great. It was a perfect example of that was last game against Atlanta where KD drops 55 and they lose because literally no one else can do anything. Right. It's like you get a 55-point performance from Kevin Durant and you lose kind of like convincingly to Atlanta. But it's one of those situations like you start feeling the losses, right? Like not having Curry, not having Dragic, not having Brown at some point, like you just can't keep. There's just no more guys to bring in. I like Cam Thomas, like his trajectory for sure. I like Kessler's trajectory for sure. But these guys, it's just too late in the season, like to have these huge leverage minutes. They need a better caliber of player, and they just don't have it. So, and that just kind of seems to be like this other kind of problem. And like at some point, you just run out of guys, right? Like you just don't. Like if you're like, and just these combinations too, like the lineup they started the other night. With Curry, Durant, Mills, Drummond, and Kessler. That lineup had never played together. It was the first minute. The first minute was at the tip. And just like it was so indicative of this whole season. It's like we're in game 77, and we just ran a starting lineup in a must-win game against Atlanta. These guys have never played on the court.
And then they're getting they're just beat on the physicality battle. And Nash actually plays Blake at the 4, but pairs him next to Johnson Drummond. It's just like you
and
can't
that's one of those like head scratchers.
You can't make this stuff up. You know,
right?
Like that's you can't make it up. You know, it's just it's like
he had just come in and said the other day, like, Blake can't play. His position is the 5, and then he instantly puts him at the 4, and you're like, what? What are we doing here?
Yeah.
Anyway, so no, this feels like this just feels like that felt so indicative of the whole season. It's like, of course, this is game 77, and these guys have never played before. Real quick before we get out the door here, Kessler Edwards, he's on the 2-way contract right now, and as it stands right now, he would not be playoff eligible unless the Nets made a roster move. And that roster move is to cut somebody, right? So like they'd have to cut somebody so they convert the contract to make him playoff eligible. Do you like where do you see it happening with him? Because he just started a game they had to win. And now we're looking at a situation where if they made no moves from now over the last 4 days, like he would not be playoff eligible. How do you see it kind of playing out with Kessler here?
It's very, very tough because, like, to be quite frank, I can't see it happening because the Nets are so, especially over the years, you've seen how the team navigates, especially with a lot of veteran players. They're very respectful to their players, and they take a very big, I guess you could say they really get their flowers around the league for treating their veteran players well. You know what I mean? You've heard players talk about it from ramping up to the medical side, to just kind of giving them a fresh opportunity. You know, it's just X, Y, and Z. It's the league knows that the Nets give their flowers to a lot of veterans. And when you're kind of in that spot where, you know, you're entering the playoffs, even though it might not be looking great, you know, if you look at all the betting sites, you know, they're still up there as the Eastern Conference favorite. You know what I mean? It's crazy. It's crazy to think. And like, you know, it wouldn't surprise me. You know, it just wouldn't surprise me because we've seen how well this team can click. But with a guy like Kessler Edwards, who's a 3-and-D guy, you're down Joe Harris. You're also got Patty Mills' shooting slump in the back of your mind, too, in that situation. You know, if you had to pick 2 guys that you were going to cut, it's either Blake Griffin or LaMarcus Aldridge. Those are your 2 guys. It's crazy even saying LaMarcus Aldridge, but you got to also keep in your back of your mind that this guy, since he's come back from injury, has not played the past 3 games. Hasn't even seen the minutes on the court at all. And in past injury absences, he would come in the second quarter, come in the first quarter, be under a minutes restriction, then he would start game 2 or 3. And then with Blake, you know, he doesn't play a lot. You know, he's not getting meaningful minutes. Against Atlanta, he got meaningful minutes, but in other games for just about a month now, he hasn't really been getting any meaningful minutes. And at that center spot where Nash even said that's his best position. So you got qualifying as a center, looking at that depth you have there. That's another thing you got there, too. Same thing with Day'Ron Sharp's not going to be playoff eligible as well. David Duke's not going to be playoff eligible as well. So you got to really count down the pieces that the Nets are going to be missing, and they got to make the decisions here. But if I had to make a decision on Kessler Edwards, I really just don't think it's going to happen just because how well respected the Nets take their veterans and how well respected they really appreciate that kind of gratitude around the league just because of that.
There's going to be and I agree with you. I think that they are not going to do it. I think if there was not that other piece, like you mentioned, like sort of like the not PR piece, but like the player piece of it, like, you know, wanting to do right by all these guys, because a lot of these guys, you know, took minimum contracts to come there. They've been really helpful. They've needed them all. And they're just really respected veterans in the league. I think if that piece wasn't there, I think there's like world. They wouldn't be talking.
They would have done it 2 weeks ago. You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing. Because it's like, if you look at like I mentioned, LaMarcus Aldridge, Blake Griffin, you know what I mean? Right. And at that point, don't get me wrong, they're both 2 guys, like, especially with Blake, he's not going to be one of those guys to get the big money contract next year just because of how many games he's been playing. Same thing with LaMarcus Aldridge, because they know that he's kind of injury prone and he's in and out of the lineups for extended periods of time. So if you cut a guy like Blake or you cut a guy like LaMarcus and you're short at that position next year, because you got to remember, Claxton's extension eligible. Obviously, Day'Ron Sharp, they're going to have to make it. He's going to be around, but at the same time, it's going to be okay. Well, actually, no. Day'Ron Sharp's going to be in the lineup. I'm thinking David Duke Jr. I don't know why I mentioned Day'Ron Sharp earlier, but you got Day'Ron Sharp in there as well, who's still raw. You know what I mean? He's still a raw product. So if they do cut someone, and like a guy like Blake Griffin or LaMarcus, like I mentioned before, it's not that PR piece, but at the same time, it's that kind of well-respected player piece that take a huge hit. And a lot of players would be like, hey, you know, I want to go to Brooklyn because of, hey, I'm getting up there in age, and, you know, they will take care of me over there. You know what I mean? So they have that piece that really, it may not seem like a big piece in a lot of people's eyes, but in the Nets organization, it's viewed as a big piece. And at the same time around that, if it was just straight basketball oriented, obviously Kessler would be there. You know what I mean?
I think too, if we're just being honest about it, like he's a really nice player and he's been excellent and he's way better than I think, he's way better than draft slot already. Right. So I think but I also think most people would agree that like, he's not the difference between them winning or losing the championship. Right. Yeah. I think the Nets have to see that way also. It's like, yes, would we rather have him in the playoffs? For sure. Like there's no chance, but if I get the sense that they probably will look at that and say, but it's also not like we're going to, we don't need him in the same way that like, Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving can like, swing a championship or something like that.
Exactly.
So that's why I don't think they'll do it.
That's exactly. I'm on the same exact page. And you kind of read Nash's lips for the past like 3-4 weeks. The guy's been really putting an emphasis on playoff physicality. Kessler Edwards does not bring playoff physicality. You know what I mean? He's just an extra shooter that goes in the corners, 3-and-D guy, especially some guy. And at the end of the day, there's like, I obviously, Doug, I always read my Twitter comments and stuff like that. And a lot of people always say, they're like, if you bring up Kessler Edwards, do we really trust him in those situations? You know what I mean? Because at the same time, you got to think he's coming off a rookie wall. He had that 14, 15-point game that he went down to 8-7, and then like he's kind of been up and down. You know what I mean? Especially shooting the ball. You have to value that in there too. So, just if you add all the pieces that me and you both mentioned for the past 10 minutes together, I really do think that Kessler Edwards is going to be done at the end of the regular season.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's where we're going to land. All right, man, this has been great. Chris Milholen over at Nets Daily. He's covering every single game. Go give him a follow on Twitter. I'm sure most of you already probably do. If you're listening to this, make sure you read his stuff on Nets Daily. We'll try to maybe, let's see if they make an extended playoff run here, we'll try to catch up in the playoffs as well.
Yeah, dude, if you want to bring me on first round or whatever.
Yeah, for sure.
Feel free, bro.
Yeah, we'll do that because that way then we'll know they'll get
out of the play-in. Exactly. They get out of the play-in. We'll do it like right before the first game of the Game 1 series, and we'll be good from there.
All right, man. Thanks so much, Chris Milholen, Nets Daily. We will make sure you go over to YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel, listen and download wherever you listen to podcasts as well. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.